Okay, so a little bit of review because there's some patterns here that we haven't talked about, but it's very beneficial if you see these patterns. So let's go back to quadrant one when we did the unit circle. So I labeled the unit circle from quadrant one from 0 degrees or 0 pi to 90 degrees or pi over 2. So, and I have all the points for 30, 45, and 60. Okay, so when we did sine, when we found sine of when we found sine of pi over 6, first thing we did was we drew this triangle here. And we said, okay, so if this is 30 degrees, this has got to be 60 degrees, this is going to be 90 degrees. And then we said, okay, we need to find sine. And then you guys know that sine is opposite over hypotenuse, right? Well, the hypotenuse is always going to be 1 it's always going to be the radius, right? It's always going to be 1. And for the unit circle, it's always going to be 1. And then opposite, well, if the angle on the unit circle is always the inside angle here, so in this case 30, opposite is always going to be that side there. And that side there is always going to be the y value. It's always going to be the y value. That's the height. So then you finish and you got pi over 1, right? Or 1 over 2. Same thing for pi over 4. For pi over 4, you have this triangle here. Let me change colors. That's probably not the best color. Let's change it. This triangle here for pi over 4, right? Or 45 degrees. You had this triangle here. So this was 45 degrees now. This was 45 degrees, and then you have your 90, right? And then let's say you were finding sine of that. Well, again, it's still opposite over hypotenuse, right? Well, hypotenuse on the unit circle is always going to be 1. So opposite again, opposite of the inside, the central angle, opposite is going to be the long side. So again, it's going to be the y coordinate. In this case, it's pi over 2. Or sorry, square root of 2 over 2. Okay, so that's the way you guys have been doing it. But there's kind of a shortcut to do this. Sine is always going to be opposite over hypotenuse. And we know that the hypotenuse is the radius, r. So what will opposite be? Opposite will always be the y coordinate. So if you know the coordinates, you can figure out what sine is going to be. So in this case here, let's do 60. Okay, I know the coordinates for a 60-degree angle. So the radius is going to be 1. What is the y value? Well, the y value is right here. So square root of 3 over 2. So sine of pi over 6 or sine of 60 is going to be square root of 3 over 2. Same thing with pi over 2 or 90 degrees. The y coordinate is 1. So sine is going to be 1. Okay? Okay, so just like sine, there's a pattern with cosine. Well, we know that cosine is always going to be adjacent over hypotenuse, or adjacent divided by hypotenuse. So any angle that we have, we're going to have, so for example, let's look at this. First, for 30 degrees on the unit circle. Again, this is 30. This is the angle that we're using. 60 and 90. Okay, so adjacent is always going to be that side there. For every triangle, it's always going to be that's going to be the adjacent side. Well, that's x. So this is x, and the hypotenuse we know is always going to be r, the radius. So if you know the coordinates, you don't have to draw triangles anymore. You can just use the x coordinates, the x coordinate divided by r. So for pi over 6, the x coordinate is the square root of 3 over 2 divided by 1, which is the radius, which equals the square root of 3 over 2. Cosine of pi over 4. Well, the x-coordinate is square root of 2 over 2 divided by 1, square root of 2 over 2. Pi over 6. Oops, sorry, it should be pi over 3. That's a mistake here. Okay, so this should be, okay, divided by 1. Pi over 2, well, in this case, it's 0. So 0 over 1 is just 0. And you have 0 on top, it's always going to be 0. Okay, so for tangent, tangent's opposite over adjacent. All right, well, let's look at for 60, or for 30. So this is the angle here. Opposite is this side right here, which is the y. Okay, so opposite is going to be y. All right, now let's go back. Adjacent. Adjacent, we said was going to be x. So y over x. So anytime we have tangent, it's on the unit circle, it's always going to be y over x. Okay, so pi over 6. Pi over 6, we have square root of 3 is the x, so that's going to square root of 3 over 2. 1/2 is the bottom. Okay, so we have 1/2 times 2 over the square root of 3. So then you're going to have 1 over the square root of 3. Okay, so you got to rationalize that. So we got to multiply by the square root of 3, square root of 3. So you're going to have the square root of 3 over the square root of 9, which is positive 3. And there you go. Okay, so you can do that for the rest of them as well. Okay, for pi over 4, pi over 3, pi over 2. So for pi over 2, you have 0 over 1. So it's y over x. So you're going to get this situation. Well, that's not 0, because anytime 0 is on the bottom, we're going to have undefined. So that's just what we have. We call it undefined because there is no answer. If you put it in your calculator, you're going to get an error. Okay.